Hi, everybody. My name is Thomas Barnekow. I'm a senior principal architect with Analog Devices since August 1st, so my second week. Just to note quickly my email address if you wanted to reach me on my kind of side business address, which I'm also using for open source development. A few words about myself quickly. As I said, I'm since August 22, I'm a senior principal architect with Analog Devices. In parallel, I'm the developer of a tool called Documate, used for high-performance Word document automation and processing. My main activities in the past 20-odd years were in management consulting and outsourcing sales. However, I've always been a software developer, and in the recent years, since 2014, something, I've actively contributed to open source projects, specifically to the Open XML SDK and the Open XML Power Tools, for example, and some others not related to Open XML. So this is also the background of today's talk. Yeah. Specifically for today, what I've done is, in support of Office.js Add-ins, I've developed some TypeScript libraries for dealing with Open XML markup in Office add-ins in TypeScript. Yeah, so one library would be the Open XML dev / linq-to-xml library, which is basically linq-to-xml that you might know from .NET for TypeScript. Yeah, and then for dealing with Open XML markup, you might know all of the namespaces that you have, like the W, the P, and so forth. So those names are all defined in this library. Yeah, all of them hosted in npm.js.org. And finally, to demonstrate what those libraries can do, I've also open sourced a link add-in projects on GitHub. I'll give you the links later. They're all in the Open XML dev organization on GitHub. And this basically is what I'm showing today, which basically demonstrates how to use those other libraries. To explain a bit the background, I'm using some slides that I've also shared already in the Dev Days Redmond 2021 to provide some context. Yeah. So let's look at this quick example of a Word document snippet on the left, which came with tons of content controls and nested content controls specifically. And that was very hard to work with in an outsourcing deal context. Yeah? And so the desire was to transform the documents that came in this form into a cleaner form that did not have those content controls, which you can see here by those markup icons here. Yeah? And so the transformation of this document from the left form into the right form was the task. And if you look at that task in Open XML markup, what you see on the left is basically a very simplified excerpt of the markup from the left document. And what you would see is the SDT, so structured document tags or content controls, which basically always have a WSDT and then a WSDT content child, and then it can have nested content, in this case, a paragraph, and again, content control, with again, a nested content control, and ultimately some revision markup, so an inserted, deleted content, in this case, a run, which basically was a closing square bracket, right? And all of this was to show a closing square bracket that was once inserted and then deleted. Yeah. The cleaned up markup, which obviously requires some recursion to do, looks like the markup on the right. Yeah. So this only has the paragraph with the inserted run, the deleted run, or the deletion marker, and then the actual run with the deleted text of a square bracket. Yeah. So this was basically the task, to turn the left markup into the right markup. To transform Open XML markup, or generally any XML markup, The most natural thing to do, if you understand a little bit about the technology, would be the XSLT, so the XML style sheet language transformations. And in such transformations, which are expressed in XML themselves, you define templates. Yeah, for example, one at the top here, matching WSDT elements, and then applying a certain template to process that. In this case, throwing away the SDT and the SDT content and only looking at the node, but applying basically the same templates again on the node. And if something wasn't an SDT, then a so-called identity transformation would be applied, which simply copies the thing on the level over to the new document and then runs those templates again. So a recursive functional transformation of the Open XML document, if you will. The same thing in C#, yeah, on the .NET platform looks like the code on the right. Yeah, so there's a clear correspondence between those first boxes here. Yeah, so for example, if you have a node that is to be transformed, and that node is an element, an X element, the name of which is w.sdt, so in text the w:/sdt, then you transform it by taking the element, take its WSDT content, yeah, the nodes of the content, and then simply transforming those nodes by using the same transformation function. And the thing at the bottom is nothing else than the identity transformation, which basically takes the element, yeah, creates a new one, yeah, with the same name, the same attributes, and a set of nodes that are transformed by the exact same function. So this is why this is called a pure functional recursive transformation. Yeah, so this is what you can do in C# very easily. And the good news now is that you can do pretty much the same thing. Yeah, so with just the language specific changes of uppercasing versus lowercasing, for example, of certain property names or function names and so forth. So you can do the exact same thing now in TypeScript, yeah, on the client side in an Office.js add-in. What is used for this purpose would be the libraries that are already mentioned. Yeah, so the linq-to-xml. Yeah, so you would see the library in GitHub and the npm.js package, and then the linq-to-ooxml or OOXML package. Yeah, again with hosted in the Office in the Open XML dev organization, and the same on the npm.js. And then lastly, the linq-to-xml sample add-in that shows how this is used and which I'm going to demo next. To understand when to use this, I mean, this is a very good approach for everybody having previous experience with Open XML, and ideally also the C# way of using the linq-to-xml package and the namespaces in Open XML. And I mean, ideally also if you have experience wherever the Office.js API does not provide adequate support for the use case that you're looking at. Yeah, I'm going to demonstrate a use case for which at least I did not see readily how this would be done in the Office.js API, which does not say that there is no way. Yeah, and I'd be interested to see if anybody knows how to do this, whether there is a way to do this. So let's look at a demo right now. Let me show you first what this looks like in Word. I have provided a very simple Word document that has some formatted text, body text and text in a table. The first one is a heading 1 paragraph that comes as standard in the normal .x, and I've just bolded this paragraph. And the second one is a heading 2, which I simply italicized. Yeah? And then there's formatted text of the exact same kind. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. In this case, the first quick is formatted using the intense emphasis character style. The second bold word is formatted using the strong character style. Everything else here on the right is formatted using direct formatting. So for example, just turning the font red, applying a highlight, trying to then make this look like the text on the left by applying italicizing and coloring the font. And the dog is simply a direct bold, yeah, not the character style. The purpose of the add-in is to basically remove all direct formatting while retaining all paragraph styles or character styles. And so if we look at the first one, for example, if I am in the paragraph or if I've marked the paragraph as a whole, this will basically transform this single paragraph. So if I click here, it will retain the heading 1 paragraph style and simply remove the bolding. The same here, the heading 2 initially italicized. If I click this, it will simply remove the italic formatting, but keep the style. Yeah, oops. In this case here, let me undo this so I can do this again. In this case here, if I run this, it will retain the first formattings, which are character styles, but throw away everything else. And I can also do this by marking the whole document, for example, and running, and you see how quick this goes, right? So this is really fast on the Mac and on the Windows Word host. However, and I can't go into too much detail, on the Office Online host, the web host, this is significantly slower and will, at least when I tried this last, show some user interface or some dialogue saying that something needs to be inserted. So this is basically what this does. One word of caution is that if I remove this, if this is done in a table, for reasons that might possibly be a bug in Microsoft Word, I don't know, the tool, at least as it's written, will not transform this text because, for example, it will tell you that the selected range is invalid. The reason is that if you select text within a table, for example, also two cells or, I don't know, a row or a column, then you cannot even take the Open XML and reinsert the exact same Open XML into the same range. That will mess up the document. And so basically I'm careful and don't even try to transform this. Yeah, it might work if you treat it, especially if you simply select a single cell, that works. If you wanted to transform a table, you would have to take the table and at least the following paragraph. If I do this, that can be done. Okay, so now jumping into the code. The first class that is hit when you launch the add-in is the app component, yeah, which returns some markup here, including the default button with the on-click handler click, which is this handler at the top. That handler basically uses the word run call to run some code in the Word context. And this key line is this one here. It is composed of two functions, namely the transform selection, which acts like kind of a driver, which makes sure that, for example, the correct content is selected. You must always select the full paragraphs. Otherwise, you will throw away paragraph formatting. And then the second thing is the remove direct formatting, which is the actual transformation function that performs the transformation, which I will show in the second step. So looking at the transform selection first, if we go into that function, this is a function that takes a transformation function and the word request context. It first gets the selection, yeah, making sure that full paragraphs are selected, tests whether the selection is valid by making sure that this is not a table that is selected. And if it's not valid, returns false and doesn't even try to transform. If it is valid, it calls the transform method that is passed to this function on the selection that was basically determined. And this means the selection is an object here at the top. So this means, and it assumes that the document element here is basically changed. And then ultimately it takes the document key, basically the content, and inserts that back into the document. Yeah. So this is the rough order of events here. And the transformation is the key point that I'm going to look next. So this transformation, this first function is the one that has the desired signature. So it takes a selection object. In this case, simply takes the document property of this selection, calls the next method, which is the actual pure functional transformation. And once it has turned the document into a transformed document, it basically replaces that document with the transformed document. And that is then the basis for doing the next step in the driver, if you will. Looking at the pure functional transformation, this is a normal recursive function. Yeah? So you have a function that typically takes a node, an X node in this case, and this is exactly the same thing that you would have in C#. And it returns an X node or null. Null in case when you want to ignore an element, filter it out. It basically always ignores anything that is not an X element, because like an X text, for example, that will be returned directly. Otherwise, if this is an element, it then looks at whether the element is a paragraph properties element, like a WPPR. If so, it calls the paragraph properties transformation, basically transforms the WPPR and all its child elements. If it is a WRPR element, it performs a run properties transformation. So all the character formatting, for example, will be dealt with. And if those elements are different, it will basically do the identity transformation and return, as I've shown you on the slide. It will return a new element with the same name, the same attributes, and it will transform the nodes using the exact same remove direct formatting transformation method. So that's the pure functional character here. It does not change or does not have any side effects, and it is recursive. Looking at those paragraph properties and run properties transformations, we look at whether the element that we have is a WPPR. If so, we transform the elements of the PPR by, again, selecting the paragraph properties transformation. So also a recursive way. We retain everything that is not null, so basically not ignored, and turn this into an array. This is exactly how you would do this in C#. No difference, really. And then if we find that we have some elements, we create a new X element and call it PPR with the retained elements as its children. Otherwise, we ignore the PPR entirely and return a null. And that will then basically be treated with up top, right? The PPR can also have an RPR again, so the same run properties transformation applies. And then for any child element, for example, if it's a P style, so the paragraph style, it will be retained. And we also need to retain the numbering properties, so the WNumPR. So in this case, we simply return the element, and otherwise we simply ignore everything else. So if we return null, like for bold, italics, some font properties that we've set, all of this will be ignored and thrown away. Lastly, the run properties transformation, if you look at this quickly, same pattern as above. So we look at the RPR, we take the retained elements, and either create a new RPR with just the retained elements, everything else thrown away, or we also return null, meaning the whole RPR can be ignored because everything was direct formatting. The only thing that we retain here by saying if element name equals our style, so that's the run style, we return that. Otherwise, everything else is simply ignored. And so this is pretty much it. Yeah, so I think this is nice and sweet and very clean. Does not require any specific knowledge of the Office.js API. Could generally be an approach that works and is very fast on at least the Word host on Windows and Mac. I was told that the team is working on improving the performance on Office Online. Of course, you can always use the Office.js API if it supports your use case. Yeah, and certainly if it supports the use case, you have no previous experience with linq-to-xml or the Open XML markup, which is super complicated, the markup itself, yeah, then it's always best to use the Office.js API. Yeah, but for the Open XML developer, that might be a good approach for certain use cases. With that, back to you, David.
All right, thank you, Thomas. That was a great demo. It's exciting to see like how if you already have C# knowledge in this space, how it translates so well to the TypeScript side. Like it's just almost the same. Very cool.